Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Nuart Plus. You're going to have an interesting day, interesting days, I guess. My name is Jan Zahl. I'm a journalist with the biggest regional paper here, Stavanger Aftenblad, which means something like Stavanger Evening Standard, which, by the way, has its 124th birthday today. So happy birthday to us. And we'll see if there will be another 124 years. Now, my paper is like cooperating with Nuart in ways I don't really understand how, but the most like visual result of it is that we have this wall called the Aftenblad Wall, and what's going to be put up there is a work by Ian Strange, who's sitting here. So what we're going to do now is to have a Q&A, and we're going to see some clips, and we're going to talk to Ian. So, first of all, welcome Ian to Stavanger.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. You haven't been to Stavanger before, have you?
No, never, no.
So now it's been like, have you been to Norway before?
No, never.
But you travel all over the world, that's what you do. So far, from what you've seen, does this look like other places, or does it look different in any way?
Well, it definitely looks different to other cities as well. I mean, But it does feel very, I mean, I grew up in Perth in Western Australia, and that was very much a resources city as well. So I'm very familiar with a city that's economy is based around resources, and particularly it's a mining state, really. And so there's familiarity there, definitely.
Yeah. Have you been to any homes in Stavanger so far?
No, not yet.
Homes.
It's been quite a short trip, actually. Yeah.
Yes. And when I ask about homes, that's because like the big thing with Ian and his work is that he's really into homes. And I think we'll start off by looking at a clip, which is a kind of like an introduction. Could you tell us first of all, because this is like a series of
yeah, so this
movies.
was a series that was commissioned by ABC, which is a TV station in Australia, commissioned a web series and broadcast series on my work. And so this was, I think what we're going to show is 3 episodes of that series. So I think the first one kind of introduces my background as an artist, and then how I came from a street art background and kind of started to move into the work that I make now. There'll be a second one that kind of shows what my typical projects look like, and another one that sort of catches up as the most recent one, but obviously we'll be able to see it.
Well, first one we'll see now. Okay, here it comes.
I've always been fascinated by the home. I think it's something that sits in everyone's imagination. It's this powerful symbol that we take with us. The act of painting on a house or crossing a house out or painting a black mark on it reveals the home to be this incredibly vulnerable object. It represents all these ideas of stability, family, community, the economy, all built into something that's this very small piece of architecture, but in reality it's so unstable.
I mean, there's many aspects to him as an artist. You know, he's a hard artist to actually identify as such.
I'm a visual artist, in part a filmmaker. I like making films, but I don't make narrative films. I like making photography. I create interventions in real life, but then document them and then exhibit the documentation. But I'm also really interested in the stories that sit behind there. So when I talk about a suburban intervention, it's when I go out and I literally intervene. So I put myself into the world and change it.
There's a surrealness to them, and you're not convinced they're real until you delve into his working methods.
So that's what I'm really interested in doing, showing reality askew and pushing and pulling with these sort of familiar images and icons in the world.
A lot of those sort of ephemeral art forms, it's there and then it's gone. Documentation is a really important part of that process.
I think when you see a home, you see it through the lens of film anyway. That's something I'm trying to access, is that familiar sense of the home in people. I don't want them to react to that.
I think his work is reflecting on the demise of the American dream in a lot of ways. I think there's a great commentary on what's happening in our country.
The house is really an important symbol. We all can relate to a home, and we all have different impressions of our home.
I didn't really start to think about home in my work until I left Australia.
Ian was well known as a street artist, particularly work from the late 1990s, operating under the moniker of Kid Zoom. And when he went first to the US, it was a mentorship he did with Ron English.
He was interesting because he had like an amazing skill set, and he was super obsessed about spray paint. Anybody that has done graffiti, I think, understands how good Ian is, because it's a very, very difficult medium. I think before Ian, it was kind of unthought of to do something that photorealistic with the spray can. Hanging next to Banksy and Swoon and all the kind of iconic figures of that movement. Ian became very famous as Kid Zoom. And I think that he felt like that was a persona that didn't fit what he wanted to ultimately be.
Like, street art and graffiti has a very gritty urban context, and for me, someone who grew up in the suburbs, I didn't necessarily feel like that was my environment or the context to make work in. Street art, graffiti, painting with aerosol, that was just one thing I was interested in doing, so I wanted to find a way of taking the photography, my film background, all those things that I was excited about, and turning them into one thing, and trying to work out what kind of artist I wanted to be. I grew up in Perth, I tried to escape for so long, and I finally end up in New York. And then the first thing I want to do is make work about the place I came from.
So, interestingly, you say here that you started reflecting on home
Yes.
when you left your own home, when you
Yep,
got to the
absolutely.
US.
Yeah.
Do you understand why? I mean, why didn't you reflect on your own home when you were home?
I think it's a good question. I think when you're in something, you don't have that perspective. And for me, I grew up in Perth, Western Australia. For me, that was a very isolated place. Particularly in my early adolescence, it was kind of just pre-internet, so it really felt like as an artist you couldn't escape or leave. You had to leave to actually see the world and escape and be an artist. So I was really defined in the negative space by the place I grew up in. I wanted to escape this, suburban upbringing and something that I didn't want to make work about. I wanted to go to these urban centres. And I think the moment, careful what you wish for, the moment I got to the States, it was the moment I was thinking, well, what's unique about me and what kind of work do I really want to make? And I think that was when I started reflecting on, you know, my origins in suburbia. What is that suburban angst, that suburban detachment that maybe motivated me to paint graffiti in the first place, so that made me want to react to my environment in that way as an adolescent, and then what motivated me to want to leave in the first place. And I think that, for me, was a starting point as a sort of fertile ground of a more personal exploration that I was interested in taking. And this is, I think, back in 2011 when it sort of started for me in that direction.
And going back to Perth, and you're like growing up there, how did you end up like doing graffiti in the first place? I mean, what was your way in to this?
It was high school, and all my friends were, like into skateboarding and riding bikes around at night. And a couple of my friends got into graffiti, and they knew that I was good at art, so they took me out, and I started being their lookout for them. And then I started painting, and then very quickly that my ability to be able to draw and paint translated into aerosol, and then I just got completely hooked and really kind of competitive to try and be the best I could be with that medium.
I talked to Martin Reed about why you're like interesting, and why he invited you, and what's like one of the like why you in a way.
Yep.
And he said that he sees you as the embodiment of the development of the street art culture, basically, because you start out like on urban walls, you start out doing tags and graffiti and everything, and then you've like moved up to being like invited to and bought by massive like important art institutions. You work with like big teams on big projects, and there's like a development there.
Yes.
Is that like an self-analysis you could like relate to? Is that how you see it yourself?
I think it'd be dangerous to say I'm representative of a movement or where a movement is going, but I think for me that was my personal journey, and I think this sort of DIY attitude that comes from painting and painting graffiti, and the fact that you just go out and you make something, and if you can't get something done through the front door, you go around the back door. You do it illegally if you have to, or you beg, borrow, steal. You do it in this sort of guerrilla way if you have to, and that's something that I take into all my projects and art practice. Is if you need to get somewhere or get something done, you just work out how to get it done, and if you have to do it by jumping a fence, you do it by jumping a fence. And I think that attitude, in the same way that I think the DIY punk movement inspired a whole bunch of artists, or skateboarding inspired a bunch of artists, is it builds an ethos in making, and I think that's something that I definitely take with me into my work. And I still spray, I still mark walls, I still use paint to sort of antagonize this object of the home, which I think that for me still has that ethos of trying to antagonize people aesthetically, because I'm not destroying these houses. You can still live in these houses if there's paint on them. Well, not the one I burnt down, but you can. For the most part, it's an aesthetic destruction. And so, if you're thinking about something that is a perceived aesthetic destruction, then you're asking, well, why is aesthetically shifting something seen as destructive? And I think that's really interesting. And I think that has a relationship to graffiti as well, saying, well, why does this not belong on a wall? And also, if there's this big mark like across a house, then why is this object so sacred? Why is this object held up with such esteem, and allows you to sort of question it by antagonizing people with these markings? So that is also coming from that I've definitely taken from that graffiti background as well.
But I mean, your art has changed and the culture has changed, hasn't it? But it has like there's a continuity there, but it has developed as well, hasn't it? I mean, what you do.
Oh, my work, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's very much a personal journey. I mean, my background was always, I painted graffiti, but I also studied film and photography, and I was always making projects with friends and working in groups of people. I love what can be achieved with collaboration. So doing massive projects has always been appealing to me, and working with film and photography, I've loved doing that. And it was really, for me, it's been the last 7 years has been working out how can I bring all my interests together, how can I create, a unique practice for me. And that was, a lot of people, but, Ron English obviously pushed me in that direction as well, and trying to find what was unique for me as an artist.
I think this is a good time to see the next part, actually, because that is an example of a massive project involving loads of people from like different trades, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to give sort of context to this one, this is the the 4th episode series, so this is 2013. And I'd been, I guess you sort of seen the work sort of started to develop, painting directly onto houses and creating those works with paint around America. So I did a project for 2 years that led to an exhibition in Melbourne at the NGV there. And then the next project was being invited to go to Christchurch in New Zealand. And so this is, I think, about 3-4 years on from that last documentary.
Can you tell us just a little bit of context about Christchurch? What kind of a place is that?
Christchurch was a very conservative city that was hit by a really terrible earthquake in 2011, which leveled most of the centre of the city and emptied out a lot of the suburbs as well. So when I went over there, it was 3 years after this massive earthquake where there were 16,000 homes scheduled for demolition. And so I was invited by the Canterbury Museum and a festival called Rise over there to work with the homes and work with the communities there. And so that is what this next piece is.
Tuesday in February the 22nd, at about 5 to 1, there was a very big earthquake. And in the suburbs of Christchurch, there was massive damage.
That's 16,000 homes that have gone. That's 16,000 families that have had to go somewhere else. There is a story out there for every individual family who's lost their house.
Suburban was really a work about the American suburbs overall. It wasn't about where those specific houses were, it was about the idea of the home.
Wow, see, that looks exactly like houses in Detroit.
It was going to Christchurch. I mean, you're talking about an area where there's 16,000 homes that can get demolished. To be asked to come in to make an artwork with some of these homes by the Canterbury Museum and by Rise Festival, I wanted to make sure that those stories of those homes and those residents and the people who lived there were somehow represented in that work.
When Ian and Jetta came, they really cared about what was right for this community. Ian was very specific about wanting to do something more ephemeral and hopeful.
I didn't want to make a work about the ruins of these houses. I wanted to make a work about the memory of these homes. I was really trying to get these homes to look like how they looked 3 years ago. I didn't want them to look devastated and broken. I wanted to honour the idea of what they were. Every single one of these houses has a big split in it. It has holes in it. It's hanging on a weird angle. It's cut in half. I wanted to cut these homes and split them open. And then in that negative space, I wanted to draw in that negative space with light.
You know, and if we chainsaw through that and
I
take
then
that
worked
piece out,
with demolition experts and engineers to work out how to make these geometric cuts. When you take the wall off a house, you remove its sense of safety. Once we completed the cuts, we painted the entire interior of the houses white so they could be lit and allow us to draw out that negative space of those cuts.
Being able to get Al Bollinger as director of photography was amazing because he is one of New Zealand's most celebrated cinematographers.
He's someone who shot Lord of the Rings, he shot Heavenly Creatures, was Peter Jackson's right-hand man for a very long time.
I've never had a direct collaboration with an artist. The way that Ian's designed the work, light is an important element of it. I'm sure everyone felt it. Even from the first night, people just as we lit up the house, people go, ah, got it, you know.
We work all through the night just to get one shot and one photograph.
Staying here all night with them and waiting for the dawn light, I mean, there's something kind of spiritual about that process. Then it becomes a balance of light between what we've done artificially and what the dawn is contributing. Gives it a sense of life and spirit.
By calling it Final Act, he's given the work, the images of these houses, an ongoing life.
We've all got to go through a grieving process. I think anything that sensitively tries to help us deal with our emotions and find resolution is really positive.
I think there's a sense of catharsis and release in the work. There is something about releasing that inner sense of the home. Letting that, literally beam out of the houses. There's a way of emotively archiving the homes. I wanted to make something that was actually beautiful and light and paid tribute to the homes, but also really said something universal about that sense of safety that a home represents.
So what happened in Christchurch, that's like an extreme situation, isn't it? But at the same time, that's an extreme possibility for you as an artist, isn't it?
Yes.
Like to have like all those houses and you can do whatever you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point was actually that I could have gone and done whatever I wanted, but the process was really collaborative. So during the earthquake in particular, one of the main buildings where people were killed was a TV station there. So a lot of the people in the film industry who worked with me on that project personally knew people who died in the quake. And so there was this aspect of this project that was about engaging with the community and developing the work with them and being part of a team that was making work within the community that was then exhibited in the community. So there was a level of catharsis there. So it's not like my previous works, which I've seen a little bit of them, but where there's big red X's painted across houses or black dots painted on houses and markings on them that quite aggressive. That's not the kind of work that I could make in Christchurch at that time. But absolutely, if there's definitely this this aspect of possibility in the houses there as well as a raw material to work with.
But how do you do this like in practice? Because like coming to a place, because you didn't. How well did you know Christchurch on beforehand? How do you work with the team and with the local community? Yeah. I mean, how much time do you spend there? What's your method of like?
So about 8 months before I went into film, I did a scout trip, and so I met with all the community leaders there. So after the earthquake, there was community volunteer groups sprung up. There was a government organisation called SERA, which was the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority. I met with mayors, I met with everybody basically to work out before I would say yes to working with the festival and the museum on it, because one of the big things that I didn't want to do is be seen as an outsider coming in and exploiting a situation. And I wanted to make sure that I'd be welcome, and also that I could make something that would be contributing. And overwhelmingly, I was told by people that there was, this is 3 years on, and there's an idea of, disaster exhaustion. So there's actually like, a tracked level of exhaustion that kicks in after 3 years. And people said this is a good time to make this work, and wanted to, these houses are just getting demolished. So they wanted to see something positive made with them. And so that was 8 months before we went in there, and then the process of creating that work was about, pre-production going into that, then being on the ground for 2 months, getting buy-in from nearly everybody, and actually getting access to the houses. And but that process and that slow process and getting the permissions means that you bring everyone on board with you. And so, someone like Al Bollinger, who's a cinematographer, I met with him on my first trip, and we started talking about a collaboration there. And so it grows, and he brings his community with him, and it sort of became something that grew kind of organically as well.
But I mean, you work with, home and these things. They're potentially like painful and complicated things as well. In this place, there's been a disaster. In when you do work with like the Rust Belt in the U.S., that's a problem. I mean, it's not the Rust Belt is not like a nice thing, a good thing,
right?
And like consequences of like the financial crash and everything. But yet, when I try to Google Ian Strange plus controversy or controversial to see, like, because if you go into something that's potentially like painful and difficult, you would in a way expect there to be some kind of controversy. Is everybody just happy about everything, or have you ever like provoked some kind of like emotion that's like ends up being like controversial or like debated or in any way?
No, I understand, and particularly within Ohio and the Rust Belt, the way that I go into communities is with community leaders and existing community groups. So there's artists who have social practice, which means, I think someone like Swoon in Braddock is a really great example of someone committing to a city and staying in that city. So as an artist, I'm not someone who is going to go into a city and stay there. So the way that I can do that is by working in cities, working with existing art organisations, existing community groups who already have those relationships and want me to come into those cities to work. And so I've had a lot of houses that I've had access to, but as soon as I've scouted them, met with the community, taken the kind of temperature of the community, there's no way I would go in there because we wouldn't be welcomed. There's places in Detroit I've been, in Ohio I've been, where they are really hard-hit neighbourhoods from the GFC, but we have, we spend weeks fixing these houses up first. So I'll go in there with a team of 10 people, and they'll meet us because we're mowing lawns and fixing up this house that's been sitting on their block, dilapidated for, 7, 8 years. And they're just happy something's happening with the house. And so for the most part, they want that house demolished. The city hasn't demolished it. We're fixing the house up. We're creating an artwork on it, and then the house gets demolished pretty quickly afterwards for the most part in those circumstances. But there are other places where I'll work with really affluent neighbourhoods, and that's actually probably where I've had the most controversy. I painted a house on Lake Michigan in Ohio, which was this big 3.5-story house, and this really, really rich neighbourhood, and the neighbours lost their minds. They just did not like a crew in there. They didn't like anyone filming. We did everything we normally do, but they just did not want us there. And I think they were just angry the house was getting demolished, but it was, and this house was getting demolished because the land is worth more than the house, and the house is getting demolished to build an even bigger house on that block. So it's, I'm not sure. Does that answer the question?
Well, yes, it does. But as an artist, would you like there to be like different kinds of reaction? Do you want to be, because when you talk about the communities, it sounds almost like a therapeutic kind of thing for them, and that's one way that art can work. But it can also like create other reactions and be provocative.
Absolutely.
Would you like to be provocative as well, or is it?
No, absolutely. Well. There's something that's shifted over the years of making this work. Is when I started working with houses, I thought of ideas in the studio, and I'd say, this is what I want to make, and I would go into communities with a really aesthetic idea of saying, I want to create this minimalist, abstract work directly onto this house. I want to work with the house in this way. But then in the process of doing that, of course, there's this community collaboration. And for me, I always thought, well, that's process, but what I'm trying to do is get a photo. And what I'm trying to do is get a film. And that, for the first few years of making these projects, right up to that project, Final Act, I thought about it as I'm trying to make an image that is arresting, that is challenging ideas of the home and its sense of safety that it represents. It's this object that is held up to really, it's this elevated object, and I wanted to create something with film and photography that is an attack or questions that sense of safety, and so that I do want as a photo for that to challenge people, but the process I didn't want to, don't want to go in and antagonize neighborhoods making it. But as I've gone forward with my work, I've started to think more and more about the process of making it as the work. So I think about it all as work now. So my last exhibition included interviews with neighbours, family photos I found inside houses. It includes my research, this idea that it's not just about going and getting a photograph, it's about an experience, and it's about the story of those neighbourhoods and those houses being represented as well.
Should we see the last clip? Because that's like where you're now as an artist, basically, isn't it?
Yep. Yes. Oh, do you want me to intro it? Or?
Should we intro? That was a very short intro, but that's what it's about, yeah.
What's interesting about Ian's career is that he's spent most of his time working overseas. I think he's part of a new generation of artists that aren't limited by geographical boundaries. I can't imagine what he's going to do next because he's a shape-shifting artist. He's not linked to one trajectory. He's more interested in convincing us that the world's an important place that we need to think about.
Every time I've made work, it's led to the next thing. I think every project informs the next project. It's really been this long process from looking at my own origins in the suburbs, then travelling around the world looking at this theme of home. One of the big things I've taken away from is the sense of the communities that I build around me while I'm making these projects. Now I don't really think about going out and getting a photograph or a film or making a painting. I really think about the experience of making the work and how that is going to change me and inform whatever it becomes. While I don't really make paintings anymore, I draw, I make preparatorial sketches. Any big project, it always comes back to my sketchbook. I think the home is such a big idea, such a big image. For me, it just keeps asking more questions, so I have to go back out.
In 800 feet, turn left onto the I-77 South ramp to Akron.
Hey, buddy.
Where you guys at?
We're scouting houses.
Oh, okay.
No,
we're headed. And I are done with the resets in Akron. He's dropping off a bunch of rental stuff, and I'm back at the house.
Okay.
Is Jed there, or are you guys out with her?
So recently I've been returning back to Ohio and through the Rust Belt region where I originally worked in 2011. For the first time looking directly at GFC homes and post-GFC foreclosed homes. I'm talking with the former neighbours, the residents, the people who used to live in there, and making these works, taking family photos that we've found inside these homes, like photos that have been abandoned, foreclosure notices that have been left inside there. I'm recording interviews with the people who used to live in those areas. I'm really trying to capture all these things that are going on inside this one house. I think having had the experience of making suburban in the past, it really made me approach this work differently. I really want to make work that is specific to a location. What can I do as an artist that a journalist can't do, that a documentary filmmaker can't do? I realised I can combine all these things and there's no real rules.
He's really looking at the human stories, you know, the social history, the idea that it's not just a container for people to live in, that there's a whole family history, there's a story that goes with that.
This is part of where I'm going with my work. It's really looking at those stories of people who are embedded in a community so much that they're going to refuse to leave.
It's a very difficult time, you know, where people are being pushed out or, you know, borders are being moved, and the whole idea of where you belong and the environment that, you know, you feel comfortable in. In a strange way, he could be a bridge, you know, it's a way of creating conversations that, you know, assist in unravelling or explaining some of the experiences that people are having in various places in the world.
I think that art is for everyone. And I think part of what he does by going into these communities, you know, the communities have died in a lot of ways, but there's still people that are living in and around there. To get to experience something like this is unique, and it's beautiful, and it's special. And so I think the more that those things happen, the better it is for everyone, not only in terms of understanding what art is or what art can be, but how we can all be touched by it in a different way. You see the links in the chain, like you see how everything's connected together. What's next is, what will Ian get out of these people that will affect him as an artist? Because I think it's the stories that they tell that will really push him to what's next.
It's exciting now when he comes to me with a big idea. I now have the wherewithal to know that we can pull it off. Very much, if there's a will, there's a way, and he will make it happen and make it work, yeah.
It's an ongoing body of work. It's like I haven't finished yet. I always have more questions and more ideas. It's never really a choice. It's always something that has to be resolved. This kind of obsession of making, and I actually don't know any other way to be. Like this is just what I'm doing with my life.
So Ian, I notice you're in the back, but I'm here. So this is Ian's desktop. This is what it looks like inside his brain, probably. So now you're in Stavanger. It's Nuart. Are you like painting down houses or burning them, or what? What are you showing? What are you doing in Stavanger?
I think I've been talking to Martin about coming out for about 4 years now, actually. And so every year it never really timed out. And so we're talking about what I could do, and what I'm exhibiting here was sort of a smaller project. So it wasn't coming in to make a big elaborate project in a community that I wasn't particularly connected with. So it's these small, I think you see me making them, these small photographic works, found vintage photographs with ink markings on top of them. And so that is sort of a studio practice that I've developed of trying out ideas. And so I've never exhibited those before, and we talked about showing those as billboards around the city, which I thought was a really exciting idea. And the other aspect is there's a installation in one of the tunnels, which is a new type of work I've been looking at making, which are these sort of house frames, like sculptures that are based on house frames, the frames of houses, these roof peaks, and trying to make this idea of a three-dimensional architectural drawing in a space out of these pieces of wood that are charred like charcoal.
And somebody should take him to a home, a suburban home of Stavanger. Thank you, Ian Strange.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you. And there'll be a break.